Good morning everybody, it's a quiet cloudy morning here in San Francisco on Fisherman's Wharf. Barely any tourists are here yet, most of them will still be in their hotels eating breakfast. It's 8 o'clock in the morning, we're heading down to Pier 33 to get a ferry over to Alcatraz. Before we get into the video, I want to say a big thank you to Livvy who purchased a ticket for me for today as a sort of going away present. So thank you Livvy, everyone get in the comments and say thank you Livvy, L-I-V-V-Y, thank you Livvy. Alright, Pier 33, this looks like it.
In 1876, they said, we'll put on a show for the people of San Francisco. They found a sailing boat that nobody cared about, and they loaded it with explosives and fireworks, towed it out into the middle of the bay and anchored it there. And then on the 4th of July, 1876, Fort Alcatraz fired at that boat for 2 hours, and they couldn't hit it. So they sent an enlisted man out there with a rowboat and a long fuse. He rowed out to the boat, lit the fuse, rowed away like crazy. They had a giant explosion. Everybody in San Francisco was very impressed. The commander here wasn't impressed at all. He just proved they couldn't hit a stationary object. So at that point, they knew that the fort had become less useful as a fort. The Army said we could convert this to an Army prison because you can't walk away from an island. The Army used this as a prison for all of the misbehaving soldiers. If you were absent without leave, if you struck an officer, if you stole something, if you got in a bar fight somewhere, you'd come here to do your sentence. This was for the entire Western US and Southeast Asia. During that time, we started getting dirt and plants on the island. The Army would send boats over to Angel Island, that big island over there. They would fill a boat with dirt, bring it back here, and then Army prisoners carried dirt up the hill and up the hill and up the hill and up the hill. When they had enough dirt on the island, they mail ordered plants from all over the world. They would write to a gardener in Wales and say, I need roses. Or they'd write to a gardener in Australia and say, I need eucalyptus trees. The end result is every plant you see on the island today is from somewhere else. We have no native plants on the island. We have a large collection of garden volunteers who maintain all this stuff, but no native plants. Let's go up the hill. Back when this was a fort, we only had one entrance to the island. That's kind of the point of a fort, right? In here, there was a drawbridge over a 14-foot deep trench. When they decided this was a prison instead, they got rid of the drawbridge and filled in the trench. That was in 1901. Here's a picture from 1902 showing you some changes that have happened over the years. First thing to note, that is not a suicide door on top. It actually had a platform in front of it. Oh. The guards used that as a relaxation area during their shift. Oh. These two trees over here, that used to be the blacksmith shop for the horses and mules on the island. We have no horses and mules on the island. Unless, did you bring a horse today? No horses and mules. The white building here in the corner is a toilet. It's a walkway to the ocean, covered for your privacy. Just drop straight to the ocean. That was considered okay back then, as was fishing off the dock at the same time. Oh. I always tell people if you're invited to a seafood dinner during the Army era, say no. Yeah. This beauty is a 1946 Chevrolet pickup truck, and it runs great because it's also a movie prop. We've had 18 movies filmed on the island. You've heard of a couple of them. Escape from Alcatraz, The Rock, The Enforcer. This was a movie called Murder in the First, starring Kevin Bacon. During the production of the movie, they brought this truck out by barge and then filmed it going up and down the island, all over the island. At the end of filming, they told the National Park Service, hey, you can have the truck. I wish they'd do that for me. This truck has a very boring life today. We drive it down to the dock, we wash it, we drive it back up here, and we park it. But the best part of the story, at the end of filming, they edited out all the scenes of the truck. So we got a truck, they got that. First prison on the island was right where we're standing. It was a big wooden structure called Lower Prison. They had another one up the hill. Guess what it was called?
Upper Prison.
Right away, man. You guys had coffee. The Army treated prisoners differently than a federal prison. In the Army, they kicked you out of your cell and made you go to work. They have a job assignment for you. It might be do construction. It might be march. You're going to march for 8 hours. They had a schoolhouse to train the soldiers that you could have a job of going to the school. They found things for you to do. Here's a big rock, make little rocks out of it. You worked all day, and then at the end of the day, they counted everybody and locked them in these very small, very stuffy cells. I'm not sure what they're excited about. Whenever the seagulls start... Yeah, I think he's just fishing. These cells weren't much fun, but you were locked in them overnight. The best description I've heard of them was they smelled like men. This is the pipe for the coal fire that kept the wooden building warm at night. Guess what? The soldiers hated that. Wooden building, lock you in, start a fire to keep you warm. They were not a fan of that at all. They had a minor fire in 1905. An sentry put it out before anything bad could happen. But that finally convinced the Army they needed a modern concrete fireproof cell house. So starting in 1909, they started constructing the cell house that we're walking to at the top of the island. Now this picture is here to show you, that's the original lighthouse from 1854. This is the size of the building they're going to build next to it. What's wrong with the size of that lighthouse? Way too short. First thing they had to build in 1909 is the 85-foot tall lighthouse that you see as you're coming in on the boat. That lighthouse is still in use today. The Coast Guard comes out and checks it regularly. They were out on Tuesday doing some maintenance. Once they had that built, they tore everything off the top of the island and they built the concrete cell house that we're walking to. Who built the prison? Army prisoners. The Army had all these men sitting around waiting to learn bricklaying and woodworking and all the other skills. They taught them and supervised them, no extra tunnels. They built the prison and moved in the next day. You did a good job, sir, here's your cell. They did that for everyone. This was an Army prison until 1934. In 1934, the Army moved out and the Federal Bureau of Prisons took over, made this the first supermax prison. This is where they sent the most dangerous, the most disruptive, or the most infamous prisoners in the federal prison system. Infamous prisoners like Al Capone. Even today, people know the name Al Capone, they may not know the story. In the 1930s, he was more famous than the president. I've literally seen newspaper clippings from the Chicago Tribune which say Al Capone went to a baseball game today. I can't imagine a modern singer getting coverage for going to an NFL game like that, can you? There are a lot of famous gangsters that were sent here, but very few people remember gangsters of the 1930s. They wanted to refurbish this place. They looked at the price and they said it'd be about $6 million to repair everything on the island. And a congressman said, if you build a new prison in my district, it'll be $5 million and you won't have the supply problems. That's a pretty compelling argument because in the 60s, $1 million was money. They built a new prison in Marion, Illinois, transferred the prisoners there, closed this place in 1963. For the next 6 years, the only person on the island was a caretaker. Fun fact, he still had the newspaper delivered every day. He was friends with KGO radio traffic helicopter pilot. And the helicopter pilot would fly over and drop a newspaper on his way to doing traffic reports. That's called friends at high places. In 1969, 6 years after the island closed, a group of Native Americans calling themselves the Indians of all tribes occupied the island for 19 months. They were trying to claim the island under the Treaty of Fort Laramie. They had a lot of ideas what they were going to do. The government disagreed, so they had a 19-month standoff. During that time, we had up to 300 Native Americans living on the island. They had all the same supply problems everybody else did. They had to bring water and food over from the mainland. They relied a lot on generous volunteers for boat time and material to keep the island running. During that same time, we had a couple thousand people who would come over on private boats for the day. I call them day trippers. They would come over to consume illegal substances or start vandalism because there was no police on the island. Vandalism, oh yeah. One night, July 1st, 1970, we had 4 fires on the same night. This used to be the social hall where the guards and the families relaxed. Top of the island, there was a warden's mansion, a 22-room mansion. The lighthouse used to be surrounded by a 2-story, 2-family lighthouse keeper's house. That's been completely torn down. And there was a medical office up there that was torn down. When these fires happened, the government blamed the occupiers. The occupiers said, really? We were living here, why would we do that? They blamed the day trippers, the people coming over for the day. There were no police on the island, nobody to investigate. So even today, we can't assign a reason for those fires. We can just say 4 fires of mysterious origin. During the prison era, this building was in great shape. This is where the guards and guards' families would relax after work. It had a 2-lane bowling alley. It had a soda fountain like you'd see in a big department store. Lots of ice cream, lots of soda. Ping pong tables and pool tables. The bottom floor was a dance floor. They held dances here Saturday night. They showed movies here. This was only for the guards and the guards' families. Prisoners never saw this building. And families did include kids. We had up to 70 children living on the island at one point. Kids would go to school in San Francisco. They'd walk down to the dock. There was a ferry that ran 12 times a day between here and San Francisco. When you get to San Francisco, it's a 2-block walk to elementary, middle, or high school. Coming back in the afternoon, you needed a wooden dog tag on your wrist because every kid in San Francisco wanted to sneak over to the Forbidden Island. Kids who grew up here said it was a very cool place. First of all, it was like a small town. Everybody knew you, you knew everybody else. You couldn't get away with much. In a way, everybody was your parent. Surprisingly, nobody locked their doors at night because everybody knew where the bad people were. They were in cells behind fences. Main rule for the kids, no toy guns. I know that's a big surprise. But they liked living here. They played ball games, they rode bikes up and down the hills. They rode roller skates. If you can imagine the old metal roller skates coming down that hill at 30 miles an hour. I'm sure they had some scrapes. One of your job assignments might be go to school. They would teach things like bookkeeping. Although I learned some prisoners in the Army era didn't know how to read and write, so they learned on the island. When this became a federal prison, all that reform went away. You were sent here because you misbehaved in another federal prison. The idea of this prison was to calm you down, make you controlled, so you could go back to another prison safely. In general, prisoners were not allowed on this end of the island. We didn't need a schoolhouse, so it became bachelor quarters for guards. We had a library in the cell house. They took the books out of this library and made it a shooting range where the guards could practice shooting their rifles and pistols. That's reform versus control. I'll warn you, the Canadian geese think they own the island. If you get too close, they like to bite. So they're nice until they're not. You can see the lighthouse. That ruined building there used to be the warden's mansion. That was a 22-room mansion that burnt down in 1970. This building in front of us is the top 3 floors of the building you saw at the dock with the Indian writing on it. These top 3 floors were guards' apartments. There also used to be 3 large apartment buildings on the flat parade ground. However, after the native occupation ended in 1971, the government came out and tore those buildings down. They didn't want anyone else living on the island. We have no one living on the island today. We have 24-hour security instead. Okay. During the prison era, here, come on guys, shut up. During the prison era, the guards wanted to live here because it was cheap and the prisoners did your laundry. There's actually a kid's book, Al Capone Does My Shirts, based on the fact Al Capone worked in the prison laundry. We have a truck coming down. Can we move out of the way there so they can make the corner? You're welcome. Even though it was cheap here, single guards didn't want to live on a desert island with a cell house. That's not a place to meet women. Single guards would live in the city and they would commute over by ferry to do their shift. Some families would choose to live in the city. Even though it was cheap here, it was very boring. Living in the city was a lot more expensive. If you were here, you paid about $35 a month with free laundry. If you lived in the city, you might pay over $100 a month. Who could imagine paying $100 a month? Isn't that crazy? Like the blue herons, they stay in that tree. That's where they build their nests. Seagulls would build a nest on your feet if you stood still long enough. They have no sense of propriety. And then there's a pair of falcons that live in a cave on the south end of the island. You actually can't see the cave. You have to have a boat come in and take you there. But it's just weird things. When you're going to fill this prison with the most dangerous people in America, you don't want anyone to escape on the way here. In the 1930s, everybody traveled by train. So the Bureau of Prisons built special train cars. They had steel bars on the windows. They had a cage at each end of the car where a guard could stand with a pistol and be safe. And they had locks on all the seats where they could lock the prisoners down. Now, they didn't want to tell the prisoners when they were coming here because many of these prisoners were part of big criminal gangs. And if the gang found out their friends were coming across country, they would have tried to stop the train and break them out. So in secrecy one day, the Bureau of Prisons backed 3 rail cars into Atlanta Federal Prison. They woke up 53 prisoners, including Al Capone, marched them onto the train, locked them to the seats, started the train across country. No chance to say goodbye. They didn't even tell the prisoners where they were going until they were already on their way. The press isn't dumb. The press knew that Alcatraz was going to be refilled. They were looking for unusual train cars, and hey, these were perfectly unusual. They had steel bars on the windows. They didn't stop in any normal train yard. Every time they stopped, there were 100 guards around the train. So the press said, they're coming to Alcatraz. The press was all over in Oakland at the main rail yard waiting for the train to arrive. The Bureau of Prisons didn't want that. Instead, they took the train around the North Bay to a little town called Tiburon, where there happened to be a dock with a rail on it. Come on in so you can see this. They pushed the rail cars onto a barge, and then they pushed the barge over here. That means that Al Capone did not touch ground between Atlanta Federal Prison and the dock at Alcatraz. Don't be nervous, you're on a flat boat in a metal tube. If anything happens, you'll be dead. When they got here, they were fine, you know. You would have heard something if there'd been a death like that. When they got here, they unlocked the seats and they marched the prisoners up this same road to the same shower where we are going. They did not get an audio tour. They got a shower, clothing, and a new cell, and then the warden sent a telegram to Washington, D.C. that said, 53 packages of furniture arrived, no damage. Trying to keep it quiet. They did the same thing for McNeil Island Prison in Washington State and Leavenworth Prison in Kansas. When this place was full, we averaged about 275 prisoners. Not that many, but these were the most disruptive prisoners. These were the escape artists who wouldn't stop trying to escape. We had one guy here who had tried to escape 16 times from other prisons. We had guys here who tried to start riots in other prisons. That's a good way to come to Alcatraz. If you try to kill a guard, you'll probably wind up at Alcatraz. So these were dangerous and disruptive prisoners. To control these prisoners, we had a ratio of 1 guard for every 3 prisoners. Now, I've talked to a modern correctional officer. She says in her secure facility, it's 1 guard for 250 prisoners. So Is that what you've seen?
Yes, in prison when I was there.
Yeah. It's,
Yeah.
you'd be surprised what I encounter here. Yeah, the 1 to 3 was tight, tight, tight. It did not stop the escape attempts. We had 14 escape attempts in 29 years. The 14 escape attempts involved 36 men. 23 were recaptured. 6 were shot and killed. 2 drowned, and 5 were listed as missing and presumed drowned. That was 2 sets of people. In 1937, 2 men broke out of a building on the far north end of the island called the Model Industries Building. They broke windows, bars, and a fence, and in heavy fog, got down to the water and were immediately sucked under. The guards didn't see what happened. It was too foggy. Only other prisoners saw what happened. Prisoners don't talk to guards. Snitches get stitches. So the guards had to keep searching for these men for a couple of years, even though the prisoners knew they'd drowned in the first 5 minutes. The other 3 unaccounted for are the basis for the movie Escape from Alcatraz with Clint Eastwood. You're going to see their actual cells in the cell house as part of the audio tour. In 1962, a year before the prison closed, 4 prisoners figured out how to carve out the back of their cells and put up a piece of cardboard and paint it so it looked like the cell, so it looked like it was untouched. Inside that hole that they made, there was a utility corridor which provided water and sewer to the cells. Thank you for not being run over. Using pipes and boards in the corridor, they climbed above the 3rd floor. They found a flat place they could build things. The first thing they built was fake heads for the cells. They would steal a sheet and some tape and build an object that kind of looked like a head. One fellow worked in the barber shop, so they had all the hair they needed for wigs. Another fellow had a paint set. He painted the heads to look flesh-colored. They would store these heads above the 3rd floor, and at night bring them into their 1st floor cell, put the head in the bed along with a couple of blankets under the sheet so it looked like a body. The guards walking by in the dark never suspected anything. Once they had the heads built, they built a raft out of stolen raincoats. They would take a raincoat, and they were made out of rubberized cotton back then. They would carve it into a big rectangle and then sew it into a tube. Glue the seam and hold it up to an uninsulated steam pipe to melt the glue and make the tube airtight. They built homemade paddles out of scrap lumber and any fasteners they could steal. One fellow ordered a concertina. It's a handheld accordion. You take the reeds out, you have a perfect bellows for inflating a raft. The night they escaped, they left their heads in the cells. I love that line. They'd been working on an air vent cover on the south end of the roof. They broke the air vent cover up to the roof, pushed up the raft, the paddles, and the bellows. They dragged it all down here where today we have a stairwell. There used to be a pipe for the kitchen bakery. They climbed down the kitchen bakery pipe over that tall fence, over another tall fence, got down to the water, inflated the raft, and disappeared. We never saw them again. We never saw the raft. We never saw bodies. So how do we know so much if we never saw them again? There were 4 people involved in the escape, but every night they had to cover the back of the cell with the cardboard, and they were using tooth powder and dirt to hold it up. This guy found something he liked better. He found some powder in the utility corridor. He didn't realize it was cement powder. He cemented himself in his cell. So when it came time to leave, he couldn't get out in time. The other 3 left without him. He eventually talked to the FBI. Their plan was to go to Angel Island, sail around Angel Island, go into Northern California, and disappear. As far as we can tell, they never made Angel Island. When this happened, it was huge news. 3 of the most dangerous criminals in America escaped from the most dangerous prison in America. The FBI said, if you see 3 men walking together, report it. Yeah, they meant if you see 3 white guys in their 30s together, report it. What they got was every report of 3 men walking down the street anywhere in North America. You and you and you, Anglin Brothers and Frank Morris, you know. You and you and you, Anglin Brothers and Frank Morris. The FBI file is this thick with sightings of the Anglin Brothers and Frank Morris, and they're all stupid. We never saw them again. So what do we think happened? We know certain things. We've done current studies for that night in 1962. We know what the currents were like at any given hour. We know they turned off the lights at 9:30 every night. They couldn't have gotten out of their cells before then. The guards have tried crawling through the hole they made, going up to the roof, down here, down the pipe, over 2 fences, down to the water, so they know about when they were ready to inflate the raft. They even created a raft of their own to try to see how long it took. So we have a pretty good idea of when they got in the water. At the time they got in the water, there was a 7-knot current going between here and Angel Island. It was flowing around Alcatraz, out through the Golden Gate, and out to the ocean. That's bad in so many ways for the prisoners. Number one, a raincoat raft is not an ocean-going vessel. Number two, a 7-knot current is more than twice the speed of a swimmer. If you get caught in that current, you're going to the ocean. And number three, just to make your night extra special, the largest collection of great white sharks in North America is just outside the Golden Gate. Very easy to suggest that somebody had a good dinner. We have no proof. Over the years, we've had people write in and show pictures and say, here's 2 guys standing in Brazil, I think it's the Anglin brothers. I look at it, it's 2 guys in sunglasses. We've had people write in and say, I am one of the escapees, I'm old, I have cancer, I'll come back to prison if you'll cure me. Every time they've investigated those, they have not been one of the prisoners. Best we can say today, if you know someone named Frank, John, or Clarence, and they're in their 90s, ask if they've ever been to San Francisco. The Army built it as a morgue, but the Army only used it one time. The last boat of the day had left and someone died, so they put the body in here for the rest of the night. The federal government never used this as a morgue. If someone died during the federal era, they would take the body to the dock and a boat would come and take it, no matter what time of day it was. They'd take it to the coroner's office. So the federal prison put in 3 large backup power generator motors, because you don't want to lose power to your prison. Now, if you look in there, you can still see the slab for a body and you can see the storage areas, but you'll also see 3 large rusty motors. If we call it the backup power generator room, nobody will come look at it. But if we call it the morgue, everybody wants to see the morgue, right? So the National Park Service invited back the original occupiers and their descendants to carefully repaint exactly what was there. It's an important part of the history of Alcatraz and an important part of the American Indian movement, so both sides wanted it restored.
dieser Wege, wie das aussah, mit modern hier.
Well guys, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that tour of Alcatraz. Remember to like, share and subscribe, and especially to comment. Thank you Livvy, that's Livvy, L-I-V-V-Y, who funded this trip. Goodbye from San Francisco. See you next time.